want to set the scene for this starter conversation. I say this is a starter conversation because this is something that's we're going to have to talk about this after the talk today, okay? This is something that should continue, okay? Because it gets harder for us to make friends after we get older. And we really want to push to actually make friends across cultures in a sense. So, let's set the scene. Picture this. We both walk into a little Indian and Nepalese restaurant on Main Street in downtown Pocatello, Idaho. We both are set in the same area, but we're sitting by ourselves. We're looking at each other. We're trying to figure out if we notice something that we have in common that's visible, but we don't see it. So with this scene in mind, I'd like everyone to think about if they have any friendships where people are different from you. All right? Because back in the restaurant, we're both noticing that we don't see anything visible that we have in common. And we're potentially moving in some type of fear, or something's keeping us from making the first step to becoming friends. Maybe it's judgment. So judgment is going to keep us from even making these new friendships. They're going to even maybe keep us from maintaining these friendships, because our judgment is based in our stereotypes that we have that are centered around these bias. And our bias can be either negative or positive, but we have them. And that's how when we have them, they help us shape the world. That's how we see the world, okay? So when we consider this, maybe judgment has kept us from even interacting with someone, or it's caused us to leave a conversation. And maybe you've left the conversation when someone's mentioned being a supporter of our President Trump, or maybe you've left the conversation when someone mentioned not being a supporter of President Trump. Because I recall a circumstance that happened for me where I went to eat with friends who I consider family. We were sitting, eating together, and a friend mentioned, historical figures tend to face a lot of trial and tribulation. And so we talked about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, and Gandhi. But then I had a friend say, hey, for me, President Trump is one of those people. Did I leave the table? No. I listened to what my friend had to say. I took it all in. I was scared because this was such a tough topic. Because in all this, my friend had actually mentioned that, hey, I'm actually in agreement with President Trump. He's actually on par in considering that Mexicans, they're taking over our country. And they're taking the country that my forefathers have used to build this country. And so I sat there in this fear saying, wow, okay. But I spoke through the fear. And we continued to eat. We actually finished our food. Literally, plates were clean, okay? We hugged. We said goodbye. Love was there. Love is still there. And that's still someone that I consider to be a close person in my life. That's still someone that I value because I accept the difference. But imagine for many of us, we may have got up from the table, maybe slammed the chair down and just left immediately, thinking to ourselves, hey, we don't want to be friends with someone like this. We don't want to connect with this individual. And in not wanting to connect with that individual is speaking to some type of fear. Like this piece of, okay, this person is different from me, so this means that they could hurt me. And we find safety in similarity, so we hold on to that because we say we don't want to get hurt. I don't want you to hurt me because you agree with something that I don't agree with. And that's scary for me. But that fear, is potentially regarding these emotions that are keeping us from connecting. So Dr. John Gottman, he's a relationship expert. He says that fear is actually one of the central emotions that is keeping us from making these connections. The fear actually keeps us from even wanting to form the friendship. So recall, we're back in this restaurant. You're looking at me, I'm looking at you. And it's like, I don't know if I want to do this because I'm white and she's a black girl. What could we have in common? But imagine if you move through that fear. Because actually, Hill Harper, a famous author, he says that fear is actually false evidence appearing real. So imagine if we were able to use that same fear that we use to play sports or to compete, and we use that to push through to talk to someone that we didn't know. We could potentially help with mass shootings, because in a lot of these situations, people aren't speaking to the mass shooter. They may be afraid to even make that connection because there's this fear of, oh, this is a different person and I don't know how to talk to them. It's a little scary. And I feel scared even talking about it right now. But imagine, potentially it's not all on you. So you didn't teach yourself. You weren't raised by yourself, potentially. You learned from the environment around you. You learned from the education provided to you. And that's okay to say. That's okay to say that, okay, I didn't teach myself these biases. I learned this in my schooling. Because I can recall learning about Sacagawea and how she helped colonial explorers. But even then, there was something that was happening that, even back then, it didn't make sense for me. You had colonial explorers going into a territory that was already owned and established by original natives. And they went into this territory and they used weapons to exercise some form of power. But imagine if they actually used another weapon, a weapon of vulnerability to connect, to actually connect instead of saying, hey, I have this weapon and you're going to do what I say. Imagine if we use this actual intentional connecting that many of us are able to do when we travel. We travel to these new places and we don't go into a new country saying, hey, I want to eat at this chain restaurant, or I want you to do this for me. We go into this new place and pretty much learn about this new culture if we're able to travel. And that's okay. So I wonder if it's more than just our upbringing and our education. I wonder if it's a piece of society that's playing a role in these messages of diversity, but not necessarily acceptance for difference. Because we're saying, hey, like, we love diversity, but then there's a reality that members of the trans population fear for their lives on a daily. People are disregarded for being Black in America. People are disregarded for having different sexual and gender preferences to include the LGBTIQ+ populations. So something's happening where society is giving us some sort of incongruent messages. Because I remember being in Paris in the Saint Michel neighborhood with my family, and I was actually followed around the clothing store. And they continued to say that this was a reality. This was something this is what happened there. But when we went into the pharmacy, my whole family was followed. And I remember one of my family members was really frustrated. And the cashier asked us, why are you so upset? Isn't this normal in America? Isn't this how it is to live as a Black person in America? Because that's what I was told. And I recall a family member saying, jamais, which means never in French. Like, we don't experience realities like that on a daily basis in America. So imagine if we were able to create a new normal where we didn't have to worry about this underlying fear being a reason for how we interacted with another person. Because think about that. They assumed I was going to steal because I identified with a certain race and a certain age class that they did not have awareness about. They didn't know that, hey, like, this girl actually listens to different types of music. They didn't know that I cried during the movie Click, you know? They didn't know those pieces about me. But imagine if they had. It would have changed things, right? So how does this matter at ISU? When we consider ISU, I've heard the continued conversation piece where people say that this is a homogenous population. There are no differences. We're all the same here. But I want to challenge the people who are thinking that, because, yeah, maybe we do identify a lot in the same similar racial identities. But imagine, could you ask yourselves the following questions? Did everyone around you grow up with both parents in the household? Did everyone around you grow up with grandparents involved? And did everyone around you grow up eating the same food? And if you answer yes to those questions, I'd ask maybe for us to go a little deeper. Are we finding safety and similarity where we're not wanting to go outside our comfort zone to try new foods or to interact with different people? When we consider our upbringing, were there people at the table that look different from us on a daily? Were our family or our friends interacting with people that look different from us on a daily? What was going on for us? So, here's a call to action. We're moving into this new narrative, right? We're creating the new normal. And we're saying that, we want to change what normal looks like for us. We want to change the narrative. We're making friends across cultures. But how do we do that? As parents, can we make sure that our children interact with people that are different from us, from different cultures? Because we would want them to be able to have comfort in interacting with someone who identifies differently, right? So, I can recognize that I've been to a few stores here and I've seen kids look very surprised at me. Potentially, maybe I've been the first Black person that they've seen. And that can change. We can say that no, we're going to start having more people at our dinner tables. We're going to start allowing our children to eat different food. We're going to start reading them different bedtime stories that include multiple cultures. We can do that because it's more than just us. It's more than inside our homes. It's a big world out there. As educators, are we going to actually be selective in what we choose to share in the classroom? So are we going to include narratives that feature friendships across cultures? Maybe allowing for circumstances in class to cover the Silk Road trade that happened across the continents, this huge trade posts that actually feature different countries coming together to buy and sell each other things. They were working together with difference, and it worked out for them. So I believe we can do it too. Because right now, currently, we have the United Nations, and they get together every day, come together, voice their opinions, their differences, and then still show up for work the next day. So these things are happening. I just wonder if there's a way for us to highlight them more, to emphasize that connection. Because we want to build these connections that are going to promote our friendships across cultures. And then for students, are you going to step outside your friend group of peers that look like you to become friends with that person that does not look like you or that does not identify with you? Because maybe in this case, maybe there's a different religion that's at play where you're like, oh, okay, you identify within this religious group and I identify in this one. But what would it look like for us to connect? Because when you really think about it, that connecting could alleviate some really big issues at hand. We could take on racism. We could take on discrimination. We could take on xenophobia. Because really think about the underlying themes in those. We're saying that we don't like difference. We're saying that when we see different, it scares us. And we don't want to deal with that. So that fear creates these irrational actions. We start to act out and maybe want to harm someone because we're that scared of difference. But imagine if we change that narrative. So, how do we actually make these friendships across cultures? It sounds pretty weird, right? Is there a really good formula for this? I wonder. Number one, let's move with the fear and not away. Because remember, fear is false evidence appearing real. And so that means we could use that to actually create a connection that would change our lives. Because if we're able to interact with someone different from us, we're able to learn something new. It opens our minds, and we're able to do big things together. Number two, listen to understand and not to respond. So really take in what the other person is saying instead of sitting there and saying like, but this, but that. Let the person have a different opinion than you. Stay at the table. Don't allow your food to get cold. Don't waste your food leaving, okay? Stay at the table. Stay in the fear. Stay with that person. Don't give up and never surrender. I know it sounds cliche and it's probably from one of my favorite childhood movies, but it's one of those pieces where not everyone is going to want to have a friendship across a different culture from their own. But keep the hope alive, okay? Make sure that, you keep pushing along so that you find someone that really wants to have the friendship with you that's from a different culture than you. And then imagine the things that you'll be able to do together. And number 4, be ready to repair and not get defensive. Because we make mistakes. So we're not always going to say the most perfect thing. And that's okay. That's really okay. So find a way to really work through the relationship, the friendship in this case. And find a way to actually be intentional about saying like, hey, I'm wrong. I offended you. What I said was hurtful, but I'm owning my mistakes and I want to move forward in this friendship. Help me become a better person. Because we're not always going to say the right thing. And if you're always focused on saying the right thing, you're walking on eggshells. And you may not be being your full self. All right, so in year 2030, we're making these friendships across cultures. And we're really considering this piece that is going to take the first step of moving in the fear to create the relationship. Okay? And then the second step is going to be working to maintain a friendship by actually repairing it. So through this discovery that we're going to have, we're going to be looking to heal to connect. We're going to be promoting diversity and inclusion in our friendships across cultures. Because we're going to be showing other people that, hey, we actually do this at ISU. We have friends that look different from us, and that's okay. But we also teach our friends about our cultures, and that's cool. Because at ISU, what we're saying is that when we go to clap together, both hands may look different. So one hand may come from a different background than the other. One may be a different shade than the other. And that's okay. But in that, we're going to be working together to create the final applause, to say that we're making these friendships across culture because we care to do it. Thank you.